Well, greetings, friends. Today I'm going to talk about a man who was, uh, a mentor to me for about 15 years of my life. Uh, from, I guess, starting when I was in my late 30s, maybe. Uh, his name is Cid Corman. If he were alive, he would have been 96 years old. This month, he was born in June in 1924, Boston, uh, Massachusetts, United States of America. This, what I'm going to read now, was written after he'd been dead for 5 years. So, here we go. 5 years of death, Cid Corman. Cid Corman was not my teacher in any way that is recognized by the world we live in as being formal or official. He was a guide on the path of living writing. It was not only me he guided. There were many before, and he was feeding into others at the same time he was helping me. A poetry guru seems somehow an apt way to refer to him. He said many, many times that poetry is a way of life. And he meant it. And he sincerely tried to live life that way. But with poetry, there is nothing worldly to gain by that living. He may have moved himself with poetry into a state of consciousness in which he became increasingly able to see everything, even nothing, as poetry. He grew. He grew. As far as I know, being a poet did not raise him into samadhi or eliminate accumulated karma. It certainly did not put him into a big fine house. Over the years he helped many, but none of us donated money to buy him an expensive automobile such as a Rolls-Royce or Mercedes-Benz or BMW, which some in the Indian Guru Swami Yoga Veda biz are riding in these days. There were things about Cid that were off-putting, and for a few years after he died, for some reason, negative was the main of what remained. It was as if his huge and at times ugly ego remained behind after death to haunt me. It brings to mind a funeral for Lao Tzu, and it stinks of my own rancor. During the 10 most intensive years of being under his tutelage, he battered my aspirations into greatly reduced versions of what they may have been before knowing him, pounded them into something more dependent on my own actuality, which is whatever it is, if anything, and does not demand more than I can be. His own pitiful and sickening boasts, such as, "I'm the most productive poet alive," or how everything he did was the best there is, which, if you hear it once, is not so horrible, but over the years, hearing these again and again, well, actually, they may have worked on me as, let that be a lesson to you, to scare me away from letting my own ego go as far as he had. For so long he could not restrain it. What bitterness there was falls away. It's been 5 years since he died. It is my blessing to be able to let all that go, to be able to embrace Cid and love him in a larger way that includes that which I disliked in him. No matter how many his faults may have been, they are celebrated now, along with everything else there is to him, just as we celebrate a sky or a moon or a flower, mountain or rock or stream or stars, anything that is just what it is, we celebrate Cid. To take me and other young writers under his wing, as he did, and nurture us, and not ask for anything in return, anything other than serious writing. Well, that kind of person in this world is not easy to find. Yes, we had to listen to him. We had to leave our pride, thinking we are somebody, thinking we know something. We had to leave that outside the entrance and sit at his knee and listen. It seemed to me there was something otherworldly about that, by which I mean something almost unheard of in our world of ego-driven, crass materialism. He played master writer, played the legend, and acted his roles well. It was rare that he felt able to relax and just be Cid, forgetting for a moment that everything he said and did might become literary history, as it is here. He seemed to want it, attention as the poet, and not want it at the same time. He was resigned to it, just as he wanted to escape it. Cid knew, as did James Baldwin, its dangers. As it turned out, he had it both ways, whether he liked it or not. I had to live my learnings, which is a kind of education that definitely is not going on in the standard, accredited, government-approved schools most of us attended and send our children to. It was me doing my work, at my words, as Cid called it. He pointed a finger. To have someone give his time, to make an effort, to lift a finger and point it, well, it was to me a blessing. At times a mixed blessing. Still, it meant everything. He saw something in me. He saw something in everyone. Life, whatever that is. He was a loving man. He had his axe he put on. He blew his own horn. He played his violin, trying to draw us into his hole, his pecuniary nothingness. But he loved me and he loved the others he was connected with. That was not a PR gimmick. It may be that he was not the world's greatest or most productive poet. I wouldn't know and don't care much about any of that. Last year, a scholar from a university in Kyoto, Daniel Bratton, was here interviewing me about my connection with Cid. His final question to me about Cid was what, in my opinion, is Cid Corman's main contribution to poetry? And my immediate answer was devotion. And that answer stands unchanged. It was maybe the last day of the year when Shizumi Corman telephoned me. Shizumi was Sid's wife, a Japanese woman, telephoned us with the news that Cid had been admitted to a hospital after having chest pains and problems breathing. He needed surgery right away, is what the doctors said. Since the new year, Chuck Sandy, who was then living and teaching in Nagoya, and maybe still there, I don't know, and who had been friendly with the Cormans for a little over a year, was sending out emails keeping all Cid's connections updated about his condition. Chuck Sandy had been visiting Cid in the hospital whenever possible. Cid had gone into surgery and had not awakened afterwards. It was February when some free days opened for me to go visit Cid in the ICU at the hospital in Kyoto. It did not seem that visiting someone in a coma would do anyone much good, but something moved me to go see him anyway. I arrived in Kyoto around noon and went straight to a hotel in the city's center. The room was ready, so I checked in, left my bags, and went out for lunch at a nearby noodle shop. Visiting time for intensive care is limited. It's twice a day, first at 10 in the morning and then at 6 in the evening, for 20 or 30 minutes each time. And Shizumi and I had arranged to meet in the hospital lobby. Waiting for 6 p.m., Shizumi and I sat and talked in the lobby at the hospital's main entrance. And she tells me what had happened on that December night, the year's last. Cid was having trouble breathing. She insisted that they go to a hospital. They went by taxi to that particular hospital because that is where Shizumi's younger brother, Shinge, was hospitalized for lung cancer, which was inoperable and which he died of a few weeks after my visit. Shinge-san was the manager of the cake and ice cream shop called Cici's, which Cid and Shizumi had started many years ago, and which specializes in various American-style cakes in large American sizes at expensive Japanese prices. And when Cid entered the hospital, he went in fully conscious under his own power. At the hospital, they did various tests and said that his heart was in very bad condition and that he needed surgery immediately. He was admitted, surgery was performed, it was triple bypass surgery. Other things were done too, but I forget what all it was they did. The doctors did something with his lungs because they had fluid in them from pneumonia. I don't understand what happened during the operation, but after it was over, Cid never regained consciousness. So it was 6 o'clock, and we head for Cid's room in the ICU ward. Before entering the room, Shizumi and I have to put on special gowns and masks, wash our hands with a special fluid. The ICU seemed fairly new. My first glance at Cid, even though I'd known for over a month that Cid was in a coma, the knowledge in no way prepared me for seeing him there in his bed. It was an unnerving sight. Never before had I seen anyone comatose, only on TV. His eyes were taped shut. Once in the room, a nurse comes in to remove tape from Cid's eyes. The eye taping, the nurse tells me, when I asked, is to prevent dryness. Sid's mouth is open and his lips are curled over his gums, like this. His false teeth are removed. This makes his jaw look weak and sagging. After being taped closed for so many hours, it takes his eyes a while to adjust to being open. Shizumi talks to him as if she were talking to a person who has trouble hearing. She holds his hand and kisses his forehead. There he is in that bed connected to various machines. That morning, a surgical team had done a tracheotomy. The breathing tube, which before had gone, Shizumi tells me, through his mouth, was now piercing directly into his neck. There was a sucking and wheezing sound as a machine pumps air into his lungs and draws it out again. Sid's chest heaves up dramatically and caves in along with the machine's working. At his mid-torso area, two transparent tubes come out from under sheets and run down the bed's side to receptacles on the floor. Different color fluids move slowly through each tube. One fluid is brownish, the other amber. There is another tube going into and down a nostril. Around his bed's head, various machines, bleeping and blinking, make a semicircle. Shizumi tells me that just after the first surgery, the entire bed was surrounded by machines, and that to see Cid, one or more of the machines had to be moved. Thinking of the machines as beneficent, as keeping Cid alive, is one way of looking at things. An uplifting way, maybe. Seen from a different perspective, though, there lies Cid in a cold, metallic bureaucracy's clutch. This was a bureaucracy that would not consider the possibility of acupuncture, which is known to be of help in some, but not all, coma cases, because it's unsanitary. So there Cid is, comatose, dying, but his doctor is worried about a possible infection from an acupuncture needle. The head doctor would not permit an acupuncturist trying, even though there are sanitized, sterilized, whatever acupuncture needles. This hospital think is a mindset that goes far beyond a hospital's walls. It is a worldwide mental attitude that Cid had long tried his best to stay away from. But now he had fallen into a mechanical hope, into the hands of the modern medical science that excludes any other approach. It is as if it does not matter if a patient dies, so long as medical practice remains orthodox. One of the machines is hooked up to a kidney machine. For some reason, there seemed to be kidney failure during the operation. What happened to Cid? Did he have a stroke during the operation? It's difficult for me to understand. A few weeks after the initial surgery, they went in again to insert a pacemaker. His heart rhythm was irregular. The doctor thought it best to use a pacemaker. Now the heart seems to be getting stronger. Its rhythm is regular. But Cid doesn't wake up. Before going to Kyoto, there was, as mentioned, email updates sent around by Cid's friends and connections by Chuck Sandy in Nagoya. According to those messages, there are moments when Cid seems to be conscious and aware of the presence of others. Chuck Sandy said that Cid, during these brief moments, would squeeze his hand in answer to various questions. One squeeze for yes, two squeezes for no. Shizumi is very small, not even 5 feet, and she has to stretch as she leans over the bed to hold his face and rub her hand over his bald head. She tells him she loves him, that he has to wake up, that he's been sleeping too long, that he has much work to do, many poems to write. She tells him Scott is here, that Scott comes a long way from Sendai, that Scott loves him, that Cid loves Scott, that he has to wake up. I speak to him. It's difficult to find words. It's hard for me to try to speak to someone who might not be hearing me. It's a first experience for me, and seeing Cid, who I just assumed would live forever despite all his poems about dying, in that condition, well, it was just numbing for me. While it is good to think that he may have moments of consciousness, it makes me wonder how I would feel knowing the horror of my own condition. Knowing it, there's not much one can do about it. A positive attitude, that is all. How frustrating, though. What a terrifying recognition it must be for Cid, if he is indeed aware. Though not a specialist, it is obvious to me that he is, it is not obvious to me that he is even momentarily at all conscious. There are eye movements, yes. There is something when I hold his hand. Are these signs of consciousness? Or are they involuntary responses to changes in sonic or visual environment? Automatic, involuntary responses to voices or any sounds, to any difference in the light between his eyes and the ceiling they stare up at. If I hadn't been holding his hand, would the muscles have moved anyway? Well, I've heard that people who are in a coma are stimulated by being talked to or read to. It seems best to go on as if he can hear and can listen. Just make pretend he can. Shizumi takes out of her bag a little book of poems. Poems that Cid made quite some time ago and dedicated to her. It is a book made with Japanese paper, hand-sewn, hand-bound. Its title is For You. She asked me to read from it, and I do, though it isn't a good reading. I am ill at ease in these surroundings. The second day, a Friday, Shizumi and I meet again in the hospital lobby in the morning, and we go together for a 10 a.m. visit. Yesterday's edginess has mostly gone. The initial shock seems to have dissipated. For reading on the plane from Sendai to Osaka, I had a portable North American Indian reader, which contains some selections of Indian poetry. I read a few of those poems, and for some reason I sensed the spirit of William Carlos Williams, a poet whose work had been a personal connection between Cid and I early on in our relationship. My voice is good, clear and resonant, strong with the Williams presence in it. One very mysterious thing happens during the first visit. I'm leaning over Cid, looking into his eyes. His eyes seem to be looking into mine. Perhaps it is telepathy. Perhaps it is my own imagination. I don't know what. But I feel him asking me something. And he seems to repeat the question several times. Are you going to speak for me? Telepathically, or even in my own imagination, I make no attempt to answer. I have no idea what he means, or what the act of being asked something in such a matter means. The fact is that I have no answer and cannot answer. So much for speaking for Cid. Nothing to say. That afternoon, I walked by myself near Kiyomizu-dera Temple, along the pottery shop street that runs up to the temple. I buy a set of man and woman teacups for Morie and I. And that night, walking home after dinner along Shijo Avenue, I purchased some incense, the kind that is made into a coil and that burns a long time. Thank you for listening.